The future was the future. Do you remember the future? If you do, maybe that dates you, not in a bad way or a good way, just in a way. Furthermore, do you remember when the future promised us a better world? Or is your memory clouded by the rain-sodden, polluted futures that Blade Runner forged back in 1982? Do you remember when you stopped feeling that the future was no longer some distant destination, a point on the horizon? But in fact, it's right here. Is this one? Okay. But it's right here. It's right here because you're being overtaken by a teenager gliding on a hoverboard while she downloads every episode of Mr. Robot directly onto a VR contact lens she bought at Spinny's 10 minutes ago. There was a time when the future was the future. Is that time still now? To speculate on this and much more, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Hito Steyerl. Hito is a Berlin-based filmmaker, writer, and artist. For anyone with an interest in the fate of images and the circulation, in particular, of disinformation, Hito's work is indispensable. No one I know quite manages to historicize the very recent present the way she does, summoning philosophy, politics, and popular culture with deadpan precision and green screen effect. So before I ask Hito to come up to the stage and join me, we're going to start with a clip from a recent film of hers called Factory of the Sun, which was part of her installation at the German Pavilion during last year's Venice Biennial. Could we please play the video?
Die Lichtgeschwindigkeit. Eine große Frage. Wir stellen sie uns immer wieder. Ist es nur möglich, langsam, kurz bis an sie heranzukommen oder sie sogar zu erreichen oder womöglich zu überwinden? Es ist ja schon einmal geglückt. Genau, im CERN in der Schweiz. Da war es doch möglich, ein Teilchen zu beschleunigen, nach Italien zu schicken und um 0,0017 Mal war es schneller als vorher. Nun hat man allerdings bei der Inspektion der Anlage entdecken müssen, dass ein Glasfaserkabel nicht richtig angeschlossen war. Ein kleiner Rechenfehler kam noch hinzu. Naja, es hat nicht wirklich geklappt. Ja, aber auch diese Fragen werden wir lösen bei Autobahn Equity.
我们的机器是由纯阳光所制成，电磁频率，光线灌入玻璃纤维电缆，阳光是我们的工厂。
Our machines are made of pure sunlight. Electromagnetic frequency. Light pumping through fiberglass cables. All that was work has melted into sunshine. Sunshine is our factory. All that was work has melted into sunshine, into dead transparency. All that was work has melted into sunshine, this is an image. An image made of light. An image moving through fiberglass cables. Electropolitical frequency. Our machines are made of pure sunlight. Sunshine is our factory. All photons are created equal. Our machines are made of pure sunlight. All that was work has melted into sunshine. Sunshine is our factory. All that was work has melted into sunshine, into dead transparency. Our machines are made of pure sunlight.
Hello, my name is Julia. I am coding a game called Factory of the Sun. But you will not be able to play this game. It will play you. This is your mission. You start off as a forced laborer in a motion capture studio. Every movement you make will be captured and converted into sunshine. 4 bots escaped from this scenario. They were shot by corporate drones during recent global uprisings.
In a statement released today, a spokesman for Deutsche Bank denied using drones to kill protesters.
There are several maps in this game. This is the first one.
Let's take a look at your firearm. This is a Sig Sauer. It was originally used by Solid Snake in Metal Gear Solid 1. The first time I shot anything was in Japan. I was going to a Catholic all-girls high school, and they had a gun club there. The Japanese girls were rather scary. In order to aim, simply press the right button, and it will bring the gun directly up to your sights, and you can align it in realism mode. Both of my parents were lieutenants in the Soviet Army. Once you're ready, aim at your target, place your finger on the trigger. My mom was particularly good with a sniper rifle. Right as the Soviet Union was collapsing, my mother decided that it was time to move to Israel. The aunt of my mother grew up in an orphanage in the Gulag, where they were referred to as orphans of the enemy. Her father was working right next to the border of Mongolia. This was right around the time of the Second World War, and when this war finished, the border shifted a few hundred kilometers to the north. He decided to take his family and move back into Russian territory. However, as they came to the border, they were stopped. They were told, "You are the enemy," and he was shot on the spot. That is a very, very good diving scene. Very nice. Okay, so let's be really specific here. It's a drone. It's a flying device that has a weapon mounted on it, and it's going to shoot you. So you sort of don't know what it is. You turn to look at it. This is where the dancing thing starts to happen. This is in Edmonton, Canada. My brother started to do internet dancing in the basement of my parents' house and got a lot of attention, and then he became a star. The Japanese fans started picking up his moves and animating them as a multitude of different characters. So now there are a lot of them. There is Forsyth, the classy guy, who is the really popular one. Everyone's in love with him. The Street Fighter character is Guile. He's the blonde one, shirtless with pants, who's like really doing these like strong punching movements. And then there's Ogvaldo, who is the weird one, the one doing all of the strange dances. Both my parents sold the Moscow apartment, which is one of the most expensive apartments you can have, and my grandparents sold their entire house and everything that they owned. They took just their books, and then when they arrived in Israel, the only thing they could afford was a car. So we have this one photograph of 3 Russian men standing next to the thing that was the same value as everything they had owned in Russia, which was a single car. This immigration was actually very strange too. And there was just this train of buses full of Russian Jews or pseudo-Jews. I don't have any recollection of this, but the bus in front of us was bombed. And as a result, we were taken into a military compound.
Will you please welcome Hito Steyerl? Thanks so much for being here, Hito. Thanks so much for sharing part of this incredible film, which is important to say is part of an environment. So we're seeing, in a way, a kind of focal point of it, but there was so much more. Could you maybe just describe very quickly how that environment had been set up?
It's usually installed in a sort of blue luminescent grid, super studio kind of infinity grid. That's how it's supposed to be shown, usually.
So, just a little bit of backstory. When we've been speaking to each other about this session, one of the things that Hito very politely, because she's a very polite person, despite her interest in warfare, she asked me, she suggested, let's discuss all those things that didn't exist before, and in particular, in parenthesis, let's not talk about the internet, because that's done to death. And then she gave me a list, a kind of ongoing list of topics, and as is always the case with my interactions with Hito, they were all new to me. So hopefully the fact that they're new to me will mean that they're also new to you. And it feels a little bit like the I'm feeling lucky button on the Google homepage that no one ever presses. So today I feel lucky. So maybe we could start, Hito, with gaming and game theory, because it's so present in Factory of the Sun. Game theory by itself sounds like a distinctly 20th century thing, actually. We think of John von Neumann, the Grand Corporation, the 1950s, and of course mutual nuclear annihilation. But gaming still sounds contemporary. Is there an evolutionary link between these two? And why is gaming something that deserves to be still thought of as future-worthy?
Well, thanks a lot for these questions. Thanks a lot for having me. Let me try to frame this in relation to the video itself, because, you know, I made it and I didn't really think about it. The general premise is it's a game that you can't play, it is playing you. And then later on, I realized that, of course, this was actually true. So on one level, it is a documentary because there are so many contemporary real-world games that are doing exactly that, that are assigning scores to your behavior. Might be financial behavior, right? Then it's called a credit score. The credit score is basically the condensation of all your past financial actions projected into the future, right? Or the thing that artists, of course, are faced with are artist rankings, which are basically scores, artist scores, where your future performance is predicted on base of your past performance, academic rankings, you name it, but also, for example, threat scores. Threat scores are some kind of result that is produced by inputting all sorts of secret action which you may have committed or not into some sort of national security computing system, and it will come up with one precise number, right? The NSA maximum threat score is apparently 400%, and it's absolutely not known, you know, how it's being produced. So in that sense, there's also one very interesting kind of score which is very, very extended, because most of these scores concern, let's say, one aspect of your actions. It's either whether you have a criminal record or whether you paid your bills or whether you exhibited at the Guggenheim. It looks at, let's say, one aspect of your actions. But there is future scores, or scores that are being in R&D, in development, in beta now, that are trying to find more comprehensive scores of you as a person. One of these scores, or future scores, is the so-called Chinese social sincerity score. It doesn't exist. It is supposed to exist by 2020 for every citizen, and it's trying to measure not only your credit ranking, but also factor in your online shopping, your online behavior, your comments on social media, your criminal record, whether you committed any driving offenses or not, in order to compute one number which describes you as a citizen, or which describes your sincerity as such. And the precursors are already, you know, they are already active. It's like credit scores, one of which is the CSAM credit score, which is now apparently used a lot for people to advertise themselves on dating websites, right? They say my credit score is such and such in order to attract potential suitors. So in that sense, I think that gaming is a reality already, and this is why it's very important, you know, to start to understand how this works. And of course, I don't think that, you know, generally people think that video gaming, in particular computer gaming, is based on mathematical game theory as it was invented starting from the 1940s. But in fact, this kind of mathematical modeling of potential future actions happen to describe actions in warfare and the economy, you know? And I think this is precisely what video games do. Usually they describe warfare in economic terms. If you shoot A or B, you get 200 points. So in that sense, it's the perfect synthesis, no, of warfare and the economy. And of course, many of these modeling strategies of future scenarios and how to best avoid and preempt them, this is why these simulations were made very often, they also apply more or less like directly to video games.
It's interesting because, again, if one looks at the history of game theory, it was basically constructed around a notion of a game that involved two players, which then, of course, mapped very conveniently after the war into a binary version of the world, and of course, as we said already, kind of the potential scenarios of mutual nuclear annihilation. One of the interesting things, I guess, about gaming today, as it's manifest, particularly online, World of Warcraft and so on and so forth, is that notion of combat is completely rhizomatic, right? Like you're no longer, there isn't one enemy. In a sense, you're playing with and against the world. And I wonder whether, kind of, again, when one reads about game theory, it's often associated, as I say, with a conception of a world which was very clearly cut. And I wonder whether in your research you've sort of discovered whether game theory has updated itself to a sort of multipolar conception of, particularly of warfare.
Oh yes, I mean definitely it has updated itself continuously, but I think the basic idea is that in order to model so many unknowns, you have to simplify them to an extent that they stop being realistic, you know, to a certain degree. They become abstractions and of course models of future or predicted actions, but there is always this abstract component which may or may not be realistic. In a paper I'm just about to write now, I was wondering, you know, especially, and this is something which maybe I'm qualified to talk about, mathematics I cannot do, but the relations to aesthetics is something that really fascinates me. The relation between mathematics and aesthetics, is there one? Yes, it seems there is. And this became clear to me when I read a column by Paul Krugman, who tried to explain how the financial crisis came about. He said, you know, at a certain time we all got mesmerized and paralyzed and seduced by beauty. All these formulas were apparently tremendously beautiful. They constituted some sort of mathematical sublime almost, right? So beauty was a factor of seduction, maybe even dazzling. So I'm really wondering, can we describe these kind of mathematics in aesthetical terms? And if we're talking about abstraction, what kind of abstraction are we talking about? You know, because there's so many different kinds of abstraction. There's abstract expressionism and cubism and whatnot. And I think that actually the abstraction we are talking about now, if we talk about in aesthetic terms, has been described by a critic named Jerry Saltz as crabstraction, right? It's the crabstraction. He coined this term to describe a genre of abstract painting which is speculative in the sense of financial investment, but also very serial, churned out as a sort of mass in a sort of mass production. And I think, you know, the kind of abstraction that happens in producing these kind of aesthetic objects is also something we have to keep in mind when we look at algorithms of governments today.
I was exactly going to bring up that word, algorithm. I mean, it's one of those things, it feels like a word that we simply didn't have. It was a specialist word even up till 5 years ago. Now we all use it, even though we probably don't know exactly how they necessarily work. But one of these terms that you flagged up to me, which I hadn't really come across, but was this notion of algorithmic policy making and algorithmic governance, which I guess the Chinese social credit score is part of. But could you expand a little bit where this is going, this notion of algorithmic policy making.
Well, of course, and I think this relates very closely to the idea of future.
Yeah.
This kind of policy making is based on databases which condense actions in the past, like in the example of the credit score. If you paid your bill, then this will be in the database. But just now try to imagine all kinds of databases being projected into the future, in the sense that whatever has been recorded in the past, however wrong and partial and abstracted it is the only thing that will be taken into consideration when trying to predict or model the future. So you have some sort of past which is constantly re-injected into the future, and the articulation in between, what kind of database, how is it articulated to the other one, what kind of montage, mathematical montage is being performed. Most of this is either secret or proprietary or intransparent and opaque, right? And this is a very interesting, I was discussing it with my colleagues Trevor Paglen and Adam Harvey. So how does this work? You have like these multiple elements of past databases, and then there is some kind of unknown operation that happens to combine them, and this is the predicted future. And Adam sort of scratched his head, and he said, I know how this works. It's like a high school reunion. Everyone tries to remember the past, but they are all on acid, right? It's like the most terrible situation one could imagine, and this is one of the models for future today.
I wonder, just before the break, we had an amazing session by Eli Ayash, and one of the things that Eli said towards the end of our conversation, when asked about whether the financial market would be able to, in a sense, completely dominate the future and turn it into something that it would ideally fantasize about, Ellie said no, that the algorithm has a finitude of potency. I wonder what your impressions were of Ellie's.
Well, absolutely. I have, again, to translate it into my own way of thinking, but he's talking about reality, in my view, right? The real existing reality cannot be predicted and computed and abstracted to the point of being manageable. Absolutely not. But what I'm talking about is the representations of future we have, and of course these are defined by these kinds of abstractional predictions, right? And just to connect a few links throughout the day, there have been several, let's say, graphs of future that have been thrown out today. The straight line, of the teleological future, one marches into the sunset. Then the cyclical future of nature, which is completely disrupted today because of climate change. The seasons do not follow one another anymore in the way they used to. Then there is a spiral of temporality that develops by way of circles. Then there is the postmodern future, which consists of fragments that are all over the place. And I think that the diagrams that Edi Ayash showed are of the same, are basically prolonging this kind of trajectory. All these, graphs in 3D space, which show lines and forms, Brownian motions, random walks. I think this is the most simple graph of what the future is imagined like today, right? It's no longer a straight line, it's a sort of random walk. And a random walk, which is random because probably the people that are walking it, they don't go straight into the sunset, but they are being tear-gassed. They cannot see where they are going. So I think basically this is the logo, if you will, or the graph of future, people stumbling towards it or away from it in a sort of random walk.
I mean, it's funny, you talked about the aesthetics of a certain kind of mathematics, and what was striking about those images that Ellie showed us is, I guess whoever generated the aesthetics of that program, is it a program from your own company, Ellie, or is it something you utilized from someone else?
absolutely.
Yeah, but the three-dimensional diagrams that your company generated, yeah. And because I guess set in this context, in this tent, in this art fair, they take on an aesthetic. I mean, for those of us who don't necessarily understand the maths behind us, we look at it primarily as an aesthetic thing.
Yes, right? But I think what you said is that the future cannot be represented, right? It is not contained by an algorithm. It is not contained by this or that kind of abstraction. These are like tools we use to simplify it to an extent so that it really becomes an abstraction. It has no more documentary or reality value, let's call it like that.
We've just got a couple of minutes left, and I was wondering whether you find the word future still a useful word, or is it one of those words that has become crapstracted, that's only useful for an auction house to think about?
No. I think it's definitely useful, but we have seen today, how every period interprets it completely anew. And I think this is missing also because we don't really understand how the contemporary works, right? It's emerging so fast that we have problems catching up, with all the developments that happen, all the kinds of models and tools of governments that are being developed right now. We really struggle to understand what they mean right now.
One of your...
And how,
Sorry.
the real question is how to connect the bits of the database, how to articulate them differently to one another, or at least elucidate the articulations. What is it between bit A and bit B? Is it a plus? Is it a minus? What is going on? I mean, this would be the first step.
One of your recent essays for Efflux Journal talked about the battleground of the museum. And I wonder whether the battleground of the museum is the natural future endgame of the museum, or is it merely one further station in its evolution?
Oh no, I think this is definitely a circle, full circle going on between battleground and museum. I mean, I think these are basically two states of a continuum, and only at a certain moment where they sort of artificially interrupted, was this continuum artificially interrupted by, pretending that art is completely different. But I think, one of the early forms of the museums is the arsenal, where you have all the weapons, which it's a kind of weapon storage, but maybe it's also a museum, but could be used for both.
And Hito, my last question is, how old is your daughter now?
Yeah.
How old is she now?
She's 10.
She's 10.
Yes.
I wonder how much you think about the future world that she will inhabit, whether that is a concern of yours, or you don't even bother, given the volatility of change that we seem to be living through.
No, the good thing, she is actively trying to manage it, so that's a good thing.
She's looking after the future herself.
Yes, exactly.
We can rest easy.
I don't have to take care of that.
I really wish we had more time, but unfortunately we don't. Will you please join me in thanking the amazing Hito Steyerl? Thank you so much.